Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
In just 4 days' time, Israelis are heading to the polls to vote in the third consecutive elections in less than a year. But the latest surveys are now predicting that Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party has an edge against his main rival, Benny Gantz's Blue and White alliance. Two major polls by Israel's Channel 12 and Kan News predict Likud winning 34 of the Knesset's 120 seats, with Blue and White getting just 33. The last few days have seen campaigns becoming more and more personal, with Likud seeking to portray Gantz as mentally incapable of running the country, and Gantz accusing Netanyahu of being a criminal who's engineering legislation to curtail the criminal cases against him. Israel Beitenu leader Avigdor Lieberman says he's now dropping his demand for a unity government and no longer wants to form a coalition with Netanyahu at all, and in the meantime, Blue and White is stepping up its attacks within its own camp as well. It's likely because Gantz is claiming that Lieberman will only sit in a government with the Blue and White party if it wins the most seats in the election. But Blue and White also says that they will not include the Joint Arab List in a future government either. Now, the Israeli Health Ministry has just made a dramatic announcement. Israelis are being urged to seriously consider refraining from traveling abroad at all as Israel attempts to isolate itself from the novel coronavirus outbreak that is rapidly spreading across the globe. ILTV's Nittany Manson reports.
If you don't have to genuinely fly, don't do so. That's the message from the Israeli government, making Israel the first country to urge its citizens to refrain from international travel altogether following the outbreak of the coronavirus. This comes after several other countries have announced that they've identified cases of the virus on their soil over the past 2 days, including the United States and Latin America. Tuesday marked the first day since the beginning of the epidemic that more new cases were recorded abroad than in China, where the disease began. The coronavirus outbreak began back in December of 2019 in Wuhan, China, and has since infected over 80,000 people worldwide and killing more than 2,000 people. Israel has already banned the entry of any foreigners who have been to China, Hong Kong, Macau, Thailand, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan in the 14 days prior. All Israelis returning home from Italy must enter a 14-day home quarantine immediately, and the Israeli government is advising the cancellation of all international conferences or gatherings in Israel in the coming months. The Israeli Health Ministry has come under fire for panicking people and causing economic and diplomatic damage to the country in the process, but claim they'd prefer to make harsher measures now than be sorry later. El Al, Israel's premier airline, is warning that it and other Israeli carriers could collapse financially in a matter of just weeks if the health ministry continues to be so stringent with travel restrictions. El Al claims it's already sustained $50 million in damages due to the coronavirus. This comes as 3 more Israelis who were diagnosed from the coronavirus have recovered, with 1 patient slated to be discharged from an Israeli hospital and 2 more headed home from Japan.
Well, the final stretch of the latest Israeli campaign season is here, but all anyone can think of is coronavirus. In fact, even Prime Minister Netanyahu has stopped shaking hands over fear of contracting the disease.
The final stretch of the latest Israeli campaign season is here, but all anyone can think of is coronavirus. In fact, even Prime Minister Netanyahu has stopped shaking hands over fear of contracting the disease. In a visit to the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron, the Likud leader is filmed refusing to outstretch his hand, while an aide whispers, "No handshakes." And other officials with the Prime Minister's office confirmed that this decision is responsible, as Netanyahu meets thousands of people every day. Meanwhile, in another responsible decision, Netanyahu is chairing discussions on Israel's economic readiness for coronavirus's consequences.
מדיניות שלנו אחת היא היערכות יתר ולא היערכות חסר, ומעל הכל זהירות ולא היסטריה.
Essentially, the new committee will be responsible for meeting daily and monitoring the trends related to Israel. It will then inform the government and the public as necessary of any changes, and the committee is comprised of representatives from Israeli banks, the Finance Ministry, and the National Security Council. But so far, what's the damage? Well, the Ministry of Finance expects a likely annual hit to the GDP of 0.25 to 1%. The Bank of Israel, on the other hand, says that if the disease both spreads and persists in the region, Israel's GDP in 2020 could be cut by nearly 3%, or $12.5 billion.
All right, now in what appears to be another push for votes, Prime Minister Netanyahu says he is moving forward with decades-old plans to construct around 3,500 homes in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank.
ונתתי הנחיה מיידית לפרסם להפקדה את התוכנית של הבנייה של 3,500 יחידות דיור ב-E1. הדבר הזה יתעכב 6 או 7 שנים.
The E1 area covers about 4.5 square miles between Jerusalem and the Israeli settlement of Ma'ale Adumim, and it's technically in Area C, meaning it's governed by Israel and will likely remain Israeli in any future peace agreement. But this is still some seriously touchy real estate, coveted both by the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's why plans to build in the region have been frozen for so long. But not anymore, says Prime Minister Netanyahu in a speech in Ma'ale Adumim. And in fact, Netanyahu is also confirming the tender for another 1,000 homes in the Jewish East Jerusalem neighborhood of Givat Hamatos.
There's a battle for Jerusalem. The purpose of this visit is to point out that the Prime Minister Sharon has frozen the ability to build the connection between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim and create thereby greater Jerusalem. Sharon won't build here, I will.
Now, it's true, these building plans had been conceived by Yitzhak Rabin back in 1995. And again, they're in Area C of the region. Plans have been frozen since at least 2009 over disputes with the Palestinian Authority. While Israel sees this region as a greater Jerusalem to be unified under Israeli sovereignty, the PA sees this region as essential to building a future state, and therefore rejects any Israeli presence.
Dangerous policy, and we consider this an act of destroying the peace process.
Finally, some measure of calm has returned now to the communities in the south following an intense barrage of rocket fire and retaliatory airstrikes. In less than 48 hours, Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists in Gaza have lobbed over 90 rockets and mortar shells at southern Israeli communities. The terror group also claims that this latest attack is a successful retaliation for the death of 3 members in Gaza and Syria. And while the IDF intercepted over 90% of the rockets aimed at populated areas, some broke through the Iron Dome's defenses, including one rocket that blasted into a playground and shrapnel that caused light damages. Thankfully, though, no injuries have been reported, and international officials, including from the EU, Germany, and UN, have condemned the Palestinian terror group for its violence. Now, in the meantime, the IDF has also launched a series of retaliatory airstrikes against Islamic Jihad positions in the Strip and in Syria, and while a shaky ceasefire is now in effect, Israeli army chiefs say they believe more violence could be on the way, especially with just 7 days left before elections. IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi warns that it's unclear if this incident is at its peak or end, or even just the beginning. What we do know is that both Blue and White Party Chairman Benny Gantz and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu are threatening severe and immediate reprisals should the terrorism continue.
אתמול תקפנו בכמה זירות, תקפנו בסוריה, תקפנו בעזה, ואנחנו מוסיפים להכות עכשיו עם מטוסים, עם טנקים, עם מסוקים, ואנחנו נמשיך להכות עד שיושב השקט. אבל יש לי גם מסר לראשי ארגוני הטרור. אם לא יושב השקט, אתם הבאים בתור.
Now, shocking news has fallen on the Middle East. The iconic former president of Egypt has died.
בשם אזרחי ישראל ובשם ממשלת ישראל, אני רוצה להביע צער עמוק על לכתו של הנשיא חוסני מובארק. הנשיא מובארק, ידיד אישי שלי, היה מנהיג שהוביל את עמו לשלום וביטחון, לשלום עם ישראל. נפגשתי איתו פעמים רבות, התרשמתי מהמחויבות שלו, ואנחנו נמשיך ללכת בדרך המשותפת הזאת. אני מבקש לשלוח תנחומים לנשיא סיסי, למשפחת מובארק ולעם המצרי.
Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has passed away at the age of 91. He had been in intensive care for a few weeks following surgery, but while statesmen like Prime Minister Netanyahu all over the world are sharing their condolences, the former Egyptian leader leaves a controversial legacy behind him. He was a commander in the Egyptian Air Forces and then vice president to Anwar Sadat, only to take his place in 1981 when Sadat was assassinated. Then as president, he was known for being a strong U.S. ally and opponent of militant Islam. law, but he was also known for greatly expanding his powers, arresting political opponents and enforcing harsh punishments against dissenters. And this is what eventually led to his downfall. Mubarak was removed from office after 30 years in power in the midst of the Arab Spring of 2011, and he was sentenced to life in prison following the popular protests against him, in which nearly 900 civilians were killed. But in 2017, his appeals were upheld, and he was both released and cleared of most charges, including inciting the killings. Still, older Egyptians look back on his years quite fondly.
ليه ذكريات كويسة إن هو كان شعب كان رئيس بجد قوي جدا ومخلي الشعب المصري ليه كيان بجد في كل الدول، وليه ذكريات سيئة حاجات يعني بسببها يعني خصخصة الشركات بجد القطاع العام والمرض اللي انتشر بطريقة غير طبيعية في عهده والفساد الغير طبيعي اللي حصل، فللأسف هو دي ذكريات فعلا هي اللي أثرت عليه.
And as far as regional peace with Israel is concerned, it is true that he largely preserved his predecessors' policies, including the historic Camp David Accords.
The second case of coronavirus has now been diagnosed in Israel, and it happens to be one of the Israelis who has just returned to the country after being quarantined for 2 weeks on the infamous Diamond Princess cruise ship off of Japan. Now, the health ministry says that the patient is in isolation and under observation.
This comes after the first case of coronavirus was announced in Israel on Friday. That patient was also among the 11 Israelis allowed off of the Diamond Princess ship in Yokohama, Japan, where over 170 people were diagnosed with the disease. 15 Israelis were on that ship, and 4 contracted the illness and are still being treated in special medical centers in Japan. Of the 11 who flew back to Israel, 2 were ultimately diagnosed with the coronavirus, despite having been tested free of the virus prior to arrival. This is why Israel is now cracking down on foreign entry, despite the damage it may cause to diplomatic relations.
קודם כל אנחנו מחמירים את הכניסה לישראל ממדינות נוספות. היום אנחנו נוסיף את אוסטרליה ואיטליה, ואת הצורך אנחנו נוסיף מדינות אחרות. אמרתי, היערכות יתר עדיפה על היערכות חסר. ישראל נהגה עד היום בצורה יותר מחמירה מכל המדינות, ואנחנו נמשיך לעשות מה שצריך כדי לשמור, למנוע את ההתפשטות של הנגיף בישראל.
Israel's now banning foreigners from competing in the Tel Aviv marathon over fears of a coronavirus outbreak at the event. The municipality says it will be fully refunding the tickets of athletes that were planning on coming from abroad, but the 40,000 local runners who have signed up will be allowed to take part in the event on Friday. Over the weekend, South Korea announced that some of its nationals who had recently been in Israel were found to be infected with the coronavirus, sparking panic and sending hundreds of Israelis into quarantine. A South Korean airliner that landed in Israel on Saturday evening has been sent back to Seoul with its passengers after the 12 Israelis on board were evacuated and quarantined. South Korea has expressed great anger with Israel over the move, but Israel is sticking to its guns and is even warning jail time to Israelis who don't adhere to health guidelines.
אנחנו פרסמנו הנחיות גם לישראלים שחוזרים ארצה, ואנחנו דורשים עמידה קפדנית בהנחיות הללו, ואנחנו מפרסמים הנחיות לציבור בישראל, ואנחנו גם כאן דורשים מהציבור לגלות אחריות מרבית, וכל אחד שימלא אחר הוראות שניתנות על ידי משרד הבריאות.
The coronavirus has killed over 2,400 people and infected tens of thousands since the start of its spread in December. As patients worldwide are increasing, some virus clusters have shown to link to China, and experts are struggling to figure out where they started. The disease has most recently gained foothold in Italy and Iran, where collectively almost 200 cases have been diagnosed.
The United States West Bank mapping team is on its way to Israel to begin scouting areas that Israel may annex as part of the White House's so-called deal of the century. However, in spite of the project's launch, the U.S. says Israel must hold off on any annexations, at least for the time being. Washington wants to give the committee ample time to conclude its work that can take weeks or even months to complete. And the U.S. wants to give time to the Palestinian Authority to come to the table and join the conversation. But still, Israeli officials have been vowing to extend sovereignty to the settlements, regardless of the PA's participation. So perhaps to that end, with less than a week until elections, Prime Minister Netanyahu is ordering at least 12 illegal outposts be hooked up to the power grid. And the Prime Minister's office also says it's in the process of legalizing many of the over 100 outposts scattered across Judea and Samaria or the West Bank region. Now, the American delegation includes U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman, his advisor, and the U.S. National Security Council's senior advisor for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel, in turn, will be matching these committee members with Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer, acting director for the Prime Minister's office Ronen Peretz, and Likud minister Yariv Levin.
The United Kingdom is now reviewing its planned 2020 donations for the Palestinian school system over the Palestinian Authority's continued support for terrorism and martyrdom in its curriculum. Over the past 5 years, the UK has given nearly $430 million US in aid to UNRWA, or the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. And this year, Britain is pledging yet another $84 million US, nearly 2/3 of which is set for Palestinian schools across Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, and Gaza. But new reports show that despite numerous calls for change over the years, PA textbooks continue to be central sources of incitement to terror against Israelis and Jews. In fact, hatred for Israel and violence against Israeli citizens is worked into every aspect of Palestinian learning, from science and social studies, and all across all age groups. And independent examinations in May of 2019 also revealed that the incitement in PA textbooks is worse today than it's ever been before, including praise for known and infamous terrorists or martyrs. Well, the UK says that it has no tolerance for such media, and London authorities have vowed to investigate the reports on UNRWA. UNRWA, on the other hand, is refusing to alter the curriculum, saying that it's a matter of respect for the PA's state sovereignty. Now, where does the line need to be drawn between religion and state in the homeland of the Jewish people? That's a question that many people are now in the midst of a political spat answering between the mayor of Tel Aviv, Ron Huldai, and culture minister Miri Regev.
Want to pray? That's totally fine. Just make sure you're not doing it at a stall within 100 meters of a public building that serves minors in Tel Aviv. That's the decision that was implemented by the Tel Aviv municipality last month, who claim they've received numerous complaints about the placement of various types of religious stalls outside of schools and public buildings. Many of these stalls invite men to pray and put on tefillin, and are run by religious movements like Chabad. Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Huldai says he's not against these stalls and that they can continue to function in Tel Aviv, as long as they aren't placed next to schools. Some non-religious Jews have complained about the stands as intrusive and as an attempt to make their children more observant against their parents' wishes. Well, Culture Minister Miri Regev has come out against the Tel Aviv mayor, claiming that he's forbidden the wearing of tefillin in Tel Aviv as a whole, and that he's essentially going against Israel's identity as a Jewish state. The mayor's response? Well, Huldai is demanding an apology for her false statement, or 100,000 shekels in compensation in a lawsuit that accuses her of libel.
All right, it's been an exciting morning for Ethiopian families across Israel. Dozens of Ethiopian immigrants have now landed in Israel as part of a government-sponsored initiative to bring the last of the Falashmura community to the Holy Land.
It's been an exciting morning for Ethiopian families across Israel. Dozens of Ethiopian immigrants have landed in Israel as part of a government-sponsored initiative to bring the last of the Falashmura community to the Holy Land. The Falashmura are Ethiopian Jews whose ancestors converted to Christianity, often under duress. And today there are about 8,000 left in Ethiopia. Many have close relatives in Israel, though, and have been waiting to immigrate, and they've been unable to because of the lack of finances and government support. Well, now 43 more Falashmura have arrived in Ben Gurion Airport on a flight from Addis Ababa, all accompanied by ministers and officials from the ruling Likud party. Prime Minister Netanyahu himself has been pushing to bring 400 Falashmura to Israel before the elections. And back in 2018, the Israeli leader authorized the immigration of 1,000 Ethiopian immigrants to Israel, but only 600 have been flown in since then. Now, the decision to fly 43 members of the community into Israel just before the elections has also caused controversy, with critics from the opposition claiming that it's a campaign ploy targeted at getting Ethiopian Israelis to vote for the Likud. The health ministry has also controversially eased demands for medical checks and vaccinations that apply to immigrants from Ethiopia in order to speed up their immigration. Today, about 140,000 Ethiopian Jews live in Israel, but 2019 saw widespread protests against police brutality and racism that targets Israeli Ethiopians.
All right, now 300 Israeli women have just marched for over 24 hours in support of a cause that is the source of major controversy in Israel.
Today, there are thousands of women worldwide who are trapped in their marriage against their will because of Jewish law. They're called chained women, or agunot, and they've been fighting an uphill battle against the strict regulations by Israel's Jewish religious authority, the rabbinate. In order for a Jewish couple to get divorced in Israel, the rabbinate requires that the husband give a formal consent in the form of a document called a get. If he refuses to, his wife cannot get a divorce. While the organization OHR Torah Stone and its Yad Leisha program is the biggest support center for these chained women, and provide them with legal representation, social help, and even private investigators to look for missing husbands who refuse to get a divorce. In the last 3 years, they've organized the Women Moving Mountains event with the support of various women's organizations, and together hundreds of women marched together in solidarity. And on Thursday, over the course of 24 hours, 300 women walked 24 kilometers in the Israeli desert to garner support for their cause. The walk included discussion circles with rabbinical and legal experts to help raise funds.
Now this is amazing. The Israeli organization Tzohar Lev runs tailor-made programs to allow children and adults with special needs to maximize their potential. And they've just launched a very unique program.
Need a babysitter? We may have the solution for you. For the first time ever, adults with special needs are offering their babysitting services in Israel. It's all thanks to Tzohar Lev, an Israeli organization that supports individuals with special needs. And they want to enhance their sense of self-worth and independence by giving them one of the most important jobs to do on the planet, taking care of kids. They're launching a daycare center where adults with learning and language disabilities will take care of 2 to 6-year-olds under the supervision of Tzohar Lev staff members. Tzohar Lev hopes that the children will also benefit from getting to know people with special needs. Today in Israel, there are about 500,000 people who deal with mental challenges.
All right, in other news, Israel and the United Arab Emirates are getting closer than ever before as a delegation of Israeli athletes land in the Gulf.
Exciting news for Israeli sports now. For the first time ever, Israel's national cycling team is going to be competing in the 2020 UAE Tour. That's right, the squad named Israel Startup Nation is going to be riding 148 kilometers through all 7 United Arab Emirates, all the way from Dubai to Abu Dhabi. The tour is the largest cycling event in the Middle East, and for a long time it was a distant dream for Israelis to even attend. Well, the Israeli cyclists claim that they've received a warm reception in the UAE, and locals have even asked to take selfies with them in their blue and white uniforms. Jewish billionaire Sylvan Adams co-owns the Israeli team, and he's been spearheading their arrival in the UAE. He was also influential in bringing them to the Grand Tour Giro d'Italia race last year. And this isn't the first time that an Israeli athletic team has competed in the UAE, though. In 2018 and 2019, Israel won gold medals in judo and jiu-jitsu in the Emirates.
That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.